All right, I think we're getting the signal that it's time for us to start, although I know will be people still coming in. But we'd like to welcome you all to the Bronystudy Panel 2, and this is the fourth year now that we've done this, Ask the Brony Psychologist, because we know, and in fact, pretty much all day, people have been coming up to us with questions and that. And so this is an opportunity, and we'll ask in a minute for, if you have questions, to line up behind the mic. And we also have some that people wrote down at our panel yesterday. So between these and your questions, I think we'll keep pretty busy in that. I also wanted to mention, I mean, we're doing this not only to try and answer some of the questions you all might have, but your questions are important because they sometimes help us, you know, fine-tune on things that we need to be looking at. So, I mean, we're studying the fandom, but the fandom is broad and there's so many different facets of it. And so sometimes your questions will afterwards go back down to South Carolina and we'll go, you know, that was a good question. And so on one of our future surveys, we'll include that. So your questions also help shape our focus. I'm Dr. Pat Edwards. This is actually my 5th BronyCon, so I've had the rare opportunity of seeing and watching it change. And has it ever changed? I think in a very positive direction. I mean, not only size, but the makeup of the convention, more and more younger people, more and more female bronies. Also, and Marcia and I were just talking a moment ago, more than any other convention I've gone to, we have had so many people approach me with stories about the impact that the fandom has had on them. So I'm not sure if it means entirely that the impact is just growing, or if people are also feeling comfortable coming forward and sharing that with us. But that is very uplifting for us. Of course, I'd like to take a lot of credit, but there's really, I can't. You know, it's the fandom that's been doing it. Marcia.
And I'm Dr. Marcia Redden, and this is my 4th BronyCon. I didn't make the first one with Dr. Edwards, but and I also see a lot of growth and a lot of positive things coming out of this. A lot of people have come up to me and commented on what an accepting, peaceful and happy group this is, and I would really have to agree that that when you get into, you know, Dr. Edwards and I go to quite a number of conventions, not fan conventions, but in psychology, and through the years, and you'll see people there with frowns on their face and they're stressed and unhappy, but when you come to BronyCon, it's smiles and it's happiness. It's just a relief for us. Mm-hmm. So thank you all for that.
Yeah. Also, to segue with what Dr. Redden just mentioned, you know, we'll go to these conventions, the psychology conventions. Of late, it's been to report on the Bronies. And it's kind of interesting because we'll do a presentation or a poster, and I'm not joking, we never get a chance to catch our breath. I mean, there are so many people coming by who are intrigued. We get a lot of "you gotta be kidding me" responses. But then when they stand and they read, they get more and more intrigued. And not surprisingly, it tends to be the younger the younger psychologists, the graduate students, and that who are very receptive. Sadly, some of our older colleagues shake their head and frown and walk away. But I feel like it's their loss, you know, that. But.
Well, you know, you can't open a closed mind, so what can I tell you?
I also wanted to mention one other thing, and then I guess if you have questions, if you want to kind of if you want to come up and start to form up a little line, you know,
that'll. Pressing?
Oh, okay, yeah, go ahead. I also wanted to mention, and for those of you who were here yesterday know, we're doing a little project with the meetup groups, and in fact we have a survey. If you go to SurveyMonkey, if you go to our bronystudy.com, you can actually take part in it. But if there are any Brony meetup admins here, right after this, if you hang around, you can follow me back. They gave us a room back in one of the areas, and I want to talk to you about some of our initial results, because part of what we're trying to do is help the meetup admins, give them ideas of what they might do to increase even more so the individuals who are taking part. Although yesterday Coder Brony, who does the census, the herd census, noted that it seems like a lot more Bronies are reporting, yeah, I'd like to go to meetups and conventions. So that may speak to, in my belief, the fact that there are more and more social Bronies, and social Bronies, don't want to pass up a chance to sort of be social. I also wanted to mention one other thing, because I like to try to help you all, I think, put into perspective somewhat what has taken place with the fandom. I've gone to several panels today hosted by sociologists, and it's positive for me to see so many other professions, sociologists, psychologists, interested, because we were the first. And in fact, when I approached the BronyCon about making our presentation in New York, we almost didn't get to do it, because one of the staff kind of shook his head and said, when science gets involved, they always mess things up. And I knew where they were coming from, but I was able to convince him, no, we were looking at the positive aspects of the Bronies. We were looking at the fact that you don't fit the stereotypes. And after we did that, the fandom responded. The next survey, Equestria Daily, put up a little blurb and said, come on, ponies, let's help this. This is science. We got 14,000 subjects in 4 days. I mean, that's an unheard of number of subjects, and that's the herd taking. This morning, one of the sociologists who was speaking commented, and sort of appreciatively up towards the herd, of how open you are to research. He said, usually you come into a group and say, we're researchers, and they say, there's the door. But he said, the Bronies say, oh man, come on over. Yeah, I'll talk with you. I'll share with you. That is part of what has helped the fandom. You're generating such a positive impact within the social sciences, because you're open, you're honest, you're willing to share. And so that also represents the fact that you are shaping the fandom, you as the individual fans, and you're influencing those of us who want to study you. You're influencing the people who make the movies about you, and all of that has this positive effect. It tends to multiply in that.
The other thing is that even if you've never been to a meetup, you don't care to go to a meetup, would you go on to Bronystudy.com and take the meetup study anyway? Because we ask questions about that. And then there's some other things that are on that survey that we are investigating. So, even if you are a secret Brony and nobody in this world knows where you are right now, would you please go and take that survey anyway? We really would appreciate it. Right now we're at about 700, and we'd really like to at least double that by the end of next week. So please, please, please take the survey, tell your friends, take the survey. We'd appreciate it.
All right, well, why don't we start? We'll take a couple questions from the line, and then I think we'll jump down and answer a few that we also got that people wrote out yesterday. So by the time, hopefully, we can get through all of them.
Yeah, I actually wrote a question for you yesterday, but my question was basically, have you found the mentally ill people within the Brony community and try to see what the effects of the show is on them and being part of the community is? A lot of fans express this show saved my life, it gave me inspiration. Every time I watch this show, I'm no matter what mood I was in before, I'm always happier. And when thinking about play therapy and art therapy, I'm thinking if one day maybe there could be a My Little Pony therapy. I
haven't thought about calling it that, but The answer to your question is we have sort of looked at that in that we did a survey back, I guess it was about a year and a half ago, and I believe, or 2 years, we presented at one of the last cons. We called it our pre-post survey, where we asked the Bronies how much depression, anxiety, different problems you had before you became a Brony, and where are you at now? And we presented that at a convention here in the spring, and there was very big differences. You know, the interesting thing is, of the Bronies, those who identified as being on medication or having been seen by a psychiatrist, they were the ones who reported even bigger positive changes. So it seemed like everybody was saying, since I became a Brony, although let me qualify that, not everyone. There was about 7 or 8% who said actually things got worse. Personally, I don't think it's necessary because they became a Brony. What we know as psychologists is some people, they're going to get a lot worse before they hit the point where they're going to turn around.
And there are some illnesses which you can predict the age at which they're going to bottom out. And that may be, you know, the case with some of these. In connection with that survey, we also asked the Bronies if they wanted to go ahead onto a separate Gmail account, and we called it the Fandom Changed My Life. And I have a stack of stories. I printed them up, and we're going in the process of going through them. But a stack about this high and I would say 95% were very positive changes. And you're right about saying that many of them felt that the Bronies actually did save their lives. We've had parents come up to us and tell us that. And we've had, I've spoken to a number of parents and grandparents today that have told me that the Bronies have made a significant difference in their young person's life.
Right. And it's interesting, recently there was a study that came out, I mean, it wasn't associated with us, it was where they looked at young adults and adolescents who were really at risk. In other words, these were individuals who were in danger of having a lot of difficulties. And what they found was that the one thing, if they had one good friend, if they had one person they could share with and talk to, that often was the thing that saved them. And I think, you know, again, the power of the fandom is it's so accepting, is that as soon as people find it, everybody's going to find some way into it and some way to make at least one friend, if not a group. So again, I think and of course, not all fandoms are like this. You know, some fandoms are very not welcoming.
And some are very competitive.
Yeah. But thank you.
I'm actually a psychology graduate. I have a master's degree in psychology from Chicago, Illinois, which I'm from. And one of the things I found most fascinating about this show, as well as others, is the impact of media in psychology. Like, there are books on the psychology of the Walking Dead television series, and ever since I've observed television, it's helped me more in ways than reading about cases about things, because when I went through training, it was all about these cases and case studies. And honestly, in a weird way, when I did see clients, I found more help in reaching to multimedia like My Little Pony and that to help them. So I guess, amongst my rambling, is there a way to get more involved into that idea of media-related psychology? Because that's something I'm looking into, like tips, advice, suggestions, because I think it's a really useful tool, because multimedia is everywhere, whether you want to see it or not. And I just would like to know more about, I guess, like working with that or doing that, from your opinions.
Well, I think one thing, and I don't think psychology, especially, and as clinical psychologists and therapists, as a field, we're not yet to that point where, the first thing we do is think about, well, how can we use media, how can we use cartoons and video games, but I think more and more we're beginning to recognize, and I think that's part of our goal, is we hope that ultimately when we finish our work with the Bronies and we have our book, although the book's not going to be the end of what our work with the Bronies, that part of what will happen is that we will open the eyes of social sciences and psychology to realize that, because there's still a lot of therapists, and we hear sometimes therapists, well, I heard they were a Brony, and I know that's a problem. And it's like, no.
No. The therapists are actually writing us and saying.
Well, now they are.
Yeah, now they are.
But there are some who still view it as a sign of some kind of mental illness, or they need to get a life, and I hope that, and I feel that psychology is beginning to realize that when you work with somebody, you got to work with who they are. And if they're into Marvel Comics, if they're into My Little Pony, if they're into the Orioles, baseball, you need to figure out, that gives their life meaning. You need to figure out how to help them use that to lift themselves up and find the direction that they need to go. So I think, although I also do suspect that humanistic types of psychology and therapy will be more amendable to these kind of ideas of that. But I think it's changing, and as a therapist, that's part of what you simply learn to do, is to make use of that. And maybe you'll become a Brony therapist.
Well,
I'd love to.
Yeah.
when I was practicing, it was very often that I kept tapes of movies in my office that I would hand them the tape and say, why don't you go look at this? Bring it back to me next time, we'll talk about it. Some of the movies, there were also with children, there are some games that you play, psychotherapeutic games which are available only to therapists. There's just a lot of ways to approach it that they do not teach you about in grad school. Trust me, been there, done that.
I don't doubt that.
Also within psychology, and you may have heard a little bit of this before, but there are some particular groups of problems, like the autism spectrum sort of disorders, that we came into contact with one person who talked about their facility where they deal with teens and that are having difficulties. They actually do in-services on how to use My Little Pony in their therapy, because it helps some individuals recognize emotions, learn how to better to express their emotions. And so, that's what fascinates a lot of people, is they go, what? But then it opens them up to looking more closely at the fandom. And so many people are discovering this is not what they think. Thank you.
Thank you.
My question's going to somewhat play the devil's advocate here, so bear with me. I am a fan of the show, I promise. But it seems like for every person who you find who has been treated or, somewhat healed in their disorder by this, or who has, found their first real friend in this fandom and thusly escaped, potential suicide, potential problems later on, you see in mainstream media a lot of people like Michael Bronies who are teased so brutally for being part of the fandom that it actually creates problems for them. My question comes in two parts. First of all, how much truth do you think there is? Because obviously part of it is mainstream media still doesn't have much acceptance for the fandom, so part of it's alienation by that. And the second part is it worth it to have this fandom helping people if it's also hurting people?
I think, did you want to start, or?
Yes, it's worth it. Because I think that by and large, the number of people that it helps far outweighs the number of people that it hurts. The other thing is that I think that those that have been harmed are those who may have gone out and exposed and revealed that their interest to the wrong people too quickly, or they may have gone overboard in expressing their interest and therefore were teased, bullied, or got a very negative reaction and so then backed out of it and said, I won't have anything to do with this again. But do I think that it's worth it? Yes, I do, because I think that by and large the number of people that it's helped has far outweighed the number of people that it's hurt. And, you know, I mean, look at all the young men that have had, you know, that have played football in college that were able to get an education. And yet some of them wound up with broken necks. You know, so you have to, you know, and of course the universities have said, it's worth it. You know, they've got those big football teams out there. But I think that there are going to be negative consequences in just about anything.
And I would agree, and I think also, in fact, I was talking to someone earlier about this, as a parent, if you have a child who is questioning, should I express my interest to my classmates and those kind of things, I think you really have to sort of say, what do you think is going to be the response in that? And as a therapist, I've done this at times. I've simply said to people, I think maybe you need to wait a little longer. Because you don't want somebody doing something they know is going to just cause unbearable bullying. Although there are things they might want to do, like prepare the groundwork for it or approach it in other ways. But I don't blame the fandom for that. I think sadly, and we all know this, whether you're a Brony or not, people still get bullied. I mean, sometimes we're going to get bullied because people just don't like how we look or who we are or what our name is, or they're just having a bad day. And so we need to be careful, especially if you're a secret Brony. I often say there's a reason why you're a secret Brony, so don't just blurt out all of a sudden to parents who won't understand or friends who will probably leave you, or you know, that you need to think about it.
I'll question if those are friends, but
Yeah,
that's
you have to
my
question
decision.
whether they are good
Peers.
friends. Peers.
Peers, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, there we go. So my major question is, like, along with all of these ongoing studies that you're doing right now with the surveys and whatnot.
Excuse me, could you speak into the microphone?
Yeah,
I
just a
can't
little.
hear you very well.
There we
Thank
go.
you.
There we go.
There we go.
All right. So my question is, basically, along with all the studies and the surveys that you have ongoing right now, what is your plan for afterward, like after the book and after everything? Do you already have some other aspects lined up for the Brony fandom? Say, you know, asking questions like how you became a Brony, those sort of questions maybe, or?
Well, we've asked a lot of those questions already.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're going to go back, you know, as the fandom, as we go through, say maybe, well, we've been at this for 4 years, that maybe after 7 years, we're going to go back and reissue that first really long.
Oh, the longitudinal study.
Yeah, everybody remembers that one, broke every rule in the book on surveying, but that really long survey, and to get the people that never did take it in the first place or who were new to the fandom. But then, you know, as this fandom grows and changes, our surveys will grow and change. And so we do plan to go ahead with the study.
Okay.
Well, and I think, you know, one of our goals all along has been to get to a point where we could write a book.
Right.
And our hope is the book will do 3 things. One, it will share with the Brony fandom, you know, because you all have been good enough to take our surveys, which are long, and come to our talks and that. So we feel like we owe it to you. Plus, we both are quite taken by, you know, the positive qualities and the impact that this has had, and we feel like anything we can do to help promote it and that. But the other 2 groups, one is the lay people, you know, parents, people who hear about it and say, well, that's weird, but they're interested. I think our book's going to help enlighten them. But the third group, and to me this is very important, are my fellow social scientists, the psychologists, the sociologists, who as a group still tend to look at any fandom negatively. You know, as I saw, it's the "they need to get a life" comment. And I'm like, well, no, they have a life, and their life involves ponies, or their life involves. And so one of the things that is also happening is we're beginning to branch out past the Bronies. And in fact, I want to thank the Bronies. Also, a year ago, I asked for Bronies who also played League of Legends. And if you're familiar with League of Legends, I had a lot. In fact, I was here when I did it. I handed out cards saying, "Here, will you?" And I knew we were into something when some of the Bronies took the card, looked at me, and said, "You sure you want to study these people?" And I thought, And we got 1,600 Bronies who also play League of Legends, and they did some of our surveys, and our initial results are quite intriguing in that it would appear that for some people playing League of Legends, it's actually a very positive experience. They come away with some very, yeah, I know, I went, huh? And that the percentage who are really trolls and trash talking bad is a very small percentage. But then my son, who's here somewhere, he commented, he said, well, because he plays League of Legends too, he said, "Dad, you know, they're also Bronies." And so we're now next month launching a larger survey where we're going to try to capture League of Legends fans who aren't Bronies. Because what we may have discovered is that being a Brony, in a sense, changes your experience of the League of Legends and that. So if not, we have found some very interesting results about League of Legends, and that it may not be quite what people think. But there's other fandoms that we may also, because ultimately I want to create a model that explains why people become fans, whether it's a baseball fan, My Little Pony fan, whatever. Because I think fandoms, for many people, most people are fans of something. Game of Thrones, Bible study. I mean,
golf.
People are, yeah, golf. And, you know, they serve important functions in everyone's life. So if everybody's a fan of something, you know, maybe we need to stop sort of labeling most fandoms as deviant and start looking at, well, what are the positive things? So ultimately, I hope that we may lead to people even viewing fandoms in general different than that.
Well, actually, this will be my follow-up question, and this will be the last question. Basically, do you plan on doing any studies with, like, basically the anti-Bronies, or people who label others as deviant? Like, basically what their motives are? Is it something they actually believe in, or is it more?
You know, one of the problems with that is getting people to participate.
Yeah. A lot of times the anti-Bronies stay away.
Yeah, when we did the first survey, it was one of the first surveys that had ever compared a fan group with a non-fan group. I'm going to tell you, Dr. Edwards and I were both teaching then. We had to promise the kids in our classrooms breakfast before the exam if they would take the survey, and each one of them get 3 people to take it. I mean, it was like beating them to you know, I mean, you wanted to threaten to give them an F, but you couldn't do that. But you know, the problem would be getting people to participate in something like that. And we have often got, I do the emails, and I've often got a lot of professors and scientists, social scientists from other countries to say, how'd you get these numbers? And what I always tell them is, we have a motivated population. Well, if you're a hater, you're not really that motivated.
Although, let me mention, and there will be a chapter in the book. You know, we're going to have, in fact, I'll say this right now, usually it gets kind of a reactive groan. There will also be a chapter on Rule 34. Because we have collected some data, but we're going to put it into perspective, okay? You know, it can be a very problematic thing. It can also be not so problematic. I mean,
well, it can be very instructional.
Right.
I mean, not the material, but the fact that people are doing it. The fact that people are doing it. I mean, you know, some of that stuff is really raunchy.
But that, I mean, trust me, it'll be an interesting chapter.
Yeah.
But also, there has been some research recently coming out, not, with the Bronies, but looking at the whole issue of internet trolls. Because the one thing we're also finding when I talk to people who are parts of other fandoms, every fandom deals with Rule 34. Every fandom has trolls who come in who just seem to relish on getting you upset and that. And there's been some recent research that shows that the worst trolls actually have a certain personality pattern. It's called the negative triad. And it's sort of like, it's who they are. They are very narcissistic. They don't care about rules. And they just love to get in there and piss people off. And so every fandom is going to have to deal. Now, one question is, are they really bronies, or are they outside trolls? Some of our hipster bronies, the early ones, looked a little bit like trolls. Mm-hmm. Some of them love to get an argument going about favorite pony. Love to get, just because they love to see people argue and get upset about it. But so we are going to address that a little bit, and I don't know if we'll be doing studies where we're trying to find the anti-bronies, but there is a growing interest in all of the fandoms in trying to understand that component. And some people say, well, it's just the internet. I don't think so. I think it's these people who use the anonymity and the freedom of the internet to just create havoc.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
It's great to see you guys again.
Oh, thank you.
I was curious, have you guys, or has anybody else done any studies on the career fields most bronies are on, whether they are STEM fields or of that sort?
Could you repeat that, please?
STEM fields, like what percentage of bronies are in like the STEM career fields or more liberal arts?
Yeah, so like technology versus the art direction.
Versus
I
the
think you
arts.
might have asked that question, or somebody asked that of Coder Brony when he did the herd census. And I have to say, I really I appreciate the work that Coder Brony has been doing all of these years. Partly because, and I've talked to him earlier today, his data and ours segue very well. In other words, what he's finding on demographics fit with what we're finding.
With what we're finding.
And I think, though, I'd have to say the same thing he did. That's one of the things we haven't asked. I mean, we ask, what level of education do you have? Are you in school? But we haven't tried to define what people are majoring in and what field they go into. However, anecdotally, I suspect that those two groups would be highly represented. And I think if you were here the other day, I mentioned how I had a secret brony once who was lamenting. He called me and he was saying, there are no other bronies, and I don't, I wish I knew someone. And he was an engineering major. And I said, why don't you just take the risk? Just ask somebody in the engineering school if they know what a brony is. And he asked one of the other students, and the guy laughed at him and said, everybody in the college is a brony. And this was an honors engineering. And so I think...
At a well-respected university.
Yeah, I think when you get into technology, engineering, those areas. But the other thing is, I think you also find a lot in the liberal arts. We come across quite a few bronies who are in psychology also. So I think... it probably falls in both of those. But that's one of the questions I think we need to ask, and we may even try to do that before we get the book out and see if we can add that, because I think people would be interested in that question.
So that is kind of something you're planning to research in the future?
We'll add it in one of our, we will be doing a post-season 5 follow-up survey. Also, just to answer a question somebody had asked, they said, do we watch the episodes? And the answer is that I do, although I have to admit I'm only about halfway through season 5 because I've got caught up with the book. But I do watch the episodes. I enjoy them. It also helps me when I talk to people because I know what the characters are, and I kind of know, and I do have a favorite pony. It's Twilight Sparkle, the student. course, somebody said, but wait, now she's a princess. And I said, well, now she's just a graduate student.
All right, well,
Thank you.
thank you.
And we will include that question in the future. Thanks.
I was wondering what some of the limitations you've come across in the study have been and how you've tried to work around them to minimize them.
Some of the what?
Limitations?
Limitations.
Well, let me mention it because in many ways we've had the luxury of having what you might call the benefits, especially of the internet. I often tell the story. I mean, we have colleagues, when I tell them about our studies and how many subjects, they salivate and they just, because they'll hunt for months to get 100 or 200 subjects, is that if you get a motivated group like we do with the Bronies, it's a lot easier to find subjects. But the internet also presents you with some difficulties. People, and sometimes they ask, well, are they being true? Are they being honest? And that's always a question that you can't necessarily answer. You have to assume, and in fact, we go through and we look at the data to make sure you don't have somebody who's answering everything with ones, or those kind of things. Or if somebody is giving extremely negative, sometimes people write nasty things in the essay questions, we'll usually drop them. But I think, and Marcia had commented a little earlier, when we started doing this, we broke one cardinal rule that everybody had about doing online surveys: keep them short, all right? But the problem with keeping them short is then if you want to study a phenomena in great complexity, you've got to give dozens and dozens of surveys. So what we did is we made our surveys fairly long, but we get a lot of information. And we held our breath, and the Bronies took them anyway. In fact, one survey was 45 minutes long, and that was the one we got 14,000 subjects in a matter of 5 days. So I was watching them come in at the rate of 5 or 6 a minute. It was just like, whoa. So that has helped balance that. But there are questions like, do we believe all of them? And we don't necessarily have ways of countering that. What else would you?
Well, I would say that one of the limitations is that anytime you ask a question and you get an answer to it, as a psychologist, there's always another question you need to ask. And the person that took the first survey may not be the person that takes the survey where we ask that follow-up question. So I would say that that's a limitation. But let me tell you that I've just finished writing the chapter of the book on the internet as laboratory. And one of the things that other studies have found, and these have been studies since 1997, is that the reliability and validity of using the internet as compared with traditional laboratory situations is extremely high. So we don't view that as really as a difficulty, that that other psychologists have had people take a personality test on the internet and a personality paper and pencil in a laboratory, and they've gotten correlations of 0.9. So they have pretty well set that to rest, that reliability and validity of internet studies is good.
Yeah. Also in the book, and Marcia's mentioning the chapter on the internet as a laboratory, we've also done some things, and we share this with the other researchers, that we've discovered. If you're going to use a fandom, you've got to respect the fandom.
Yeah.
There are people who go in and research groups and they have no idea what the group's about. They don't know the terminology. They don't know who the characters are. And they go in with an attitude like, you're a bunch of screwed up people and I'm going to figure out why. Well, you can't do that. You've got, and I think we've been very respectful of the fandom, very thankful of the fandom. And so I think we've been able to counteract that suspiciousness. Now, one thing we have discovered with our longitudinal study and that is if you try to keep in contact with subjects through email, that can be difficult. People don't check their email real often, and especially some of the younger, I think some of the younger fans just, email is not, they don't use it as regularly. So it's been a little bit of a challenge trying to follow a group of Bronies. You know, we'd like to have a bigger group, but it's just so hard to keep in touch with them. But that's always a problem with longitudinal data. You know that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I was wondering if in either the cross-sectional or in the longitudinal study, if you've ever come across any data points that would suggest whether individuals within the fandom tend to be more individualistic or collectivistic.
To be honest with you, I don't know that we've asked the question in that way. I mean, we've got sort of issues like introversion, extroversion. But what you're talking about is kind of almost a little bit more the idea of how they might approach the society and the idea of how we organize, you know, are we individuals? Are we all working for the same goal? I don't think we've asked that question particularly that way.
But my sense is that, you know, in meeting the Bronies and from the data that we have, is that this is a real individualistic group.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Hey.
Hey.
Hi.
So my question's kind of like, not really two-parted, but kind of. Have you had any?
Could you speak up, please?
Oh, sorry. Have you had any furries and or bronies that are like both fandoms, and or have you put any? Like you said, you were doing studies on other fandoms.
Mm-hmm.
Have you studied more for the furries to try to become bronies? How?
We
Yeah.
haven't, in fact, we haven't asked, in general with the Bronies, we have not made an effort to ask what other specific fandoms they're involved with, although we usually ask, are you fans of these other groups of, you know, like are you fans of anime, are you fans of sports teams and that. But we do have, and we know there are some researchers who are studying furries, and the word we get from them is they say a lot of times about 25% of their furries also report that they are Bronies. So my suspicion is if we were to ask, we would find, and actually, to be honest with you, watching people walk around, some of those people look like furries to me,
Yeah.
you know, in their animal, which is great, and it was a very cute fox
Great
went
costumes.
by, you know. Yeah, great costume. Although it is interesting, there is one thing that has come up, and in fact, one of our students did a presentation at a convention earlier in the spring, is that there was a paper done on the furries back a number of years ago in which it was hypothesized that the furries, that there were a subgroup of furries who were experiencing, and they coined the term species identity disorder. And the idea was this, that they actually truly believe they are part animal trapped in a human's body. And well, this research was it was done by a researcher up in New York, and I tended to think that it has some validity. But they contacted us and said, well, do you think the Bronies, that there may be like a quarter of the Bronies who think they are ponies trapped in human bodies? And we kind of went,
We asked the
but
question.
we did, in one of our earlier surveys, we created an assessment that asked them, you know, what was it about the ponies? And it actually literally asked them, to what degree do you feel like you are a pony and you're trapped? And what we ended up discovering is that unlike the furries, by and large, I think it was like a 0.04%, I mean, it was incredibly small, the Bronies fit that, you know, most of the Bronies, about 75%, identify with the pony. In other words, you know, you look at Twilight Sparkle and say, yeah, I'm Twilight. Not that I am a pony, but I am personality-wise like Twilight. Or you like the pony because, well, who wouldn't want to be a little more like Pinkie Pie or Rainbow Dash? So what we found is that for the Bronies, it was more of an identification with the personality of the pony. It's not that they think they're ponies trapped in human bodies and that. So, so I would suspect that those furries who are bronies are probably not that group who think they're animals trapped in human bodies, you know. But
Okay.
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out a proper question, but all right, I think I finally got it. Okay, so with the fandom and with MLP, I noticed there was like a trend, whereas people who are depressed and have anxiety and stuff, they get some sort of alleviation from My Little Pony. Like most entertainment, you know, it's like an active rest type of thing. Like you just recharge mentally, but yet at the same time you do something. I almost lost track of what I was saying. Anyway, back to the point I was saying. With the fandom, do you think it's one of the reasons why it got so big is because of the fact that it's so accepting, you know, both of people with disabilities and emotions and stuff like that? Yeah, it's probably a simple question, but you know.
Yes, I do. I think that one of the reasons is because this fandom is so accepting. The other reason that I think, though, is because those who do have some kind of problems are getting something out of this. If you take a look at this, at the shows, it's all about solving problems, and it's all about friendship, the values of friendship, solving conflicts between individuals, between a group and individuals, or between two groups. And I think that people are getting something out of that they would not have gotten otherwise. And that's one of the reasons why the fandom has grown. But that's, you know, as I said yesterday, one of the reasons why the fandom has grown is because it's just plain. My Little Pony is just fun and it's cute. And if I'm watching My Little Pony and my grandchildren walk in the room, I don't have to flip the channel.
I would also add, and one of the courses I teach is Developmental Psychology, which looks at the question of how we change across time. And one of the big theories in it is Erik Erikson's idea that from the day we're born to the day we die, we are constantly changing, and that in age groups, there are certain issues that, you know, everybody who's 4, 5, or 6 is dealing with, and then everybody who's 6 through 9 is dealing with. And one of the issues is in adolescence and young adulthood, which is where a lot of the bronies fall. One of the big issues is figuring out who you are, figuring out your direction in life. In other words, it's like all adolescents and young adults are asking, who am I, what am I doing, where do I fit anywhere? And I think that this is where the fandom, being so accepting and open, it's a perfect place to look for your identity. It's a perfect place to figure out where do I fit. And not only that, it's okay to wear, you know, animal ears and wings, and you know, it's okay to
And dress up.
Yeah, to dress up and do cosplay, and so part of it I see as, if this was a fandom that was attracting 50 and 60-year-olds, you know, there would be a whole different issue they would be dealing with. But I think partly because a lot of the fans are dealing with the sort of identity and also intimacy. How do I start really making close friends, which could eventually lead to, you know, relationships and marriage. So I think it's the age group that also, and this is a perfect place to explore.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm actually a student in psychology right now.
Okay.
I had kind of a two-parter question. The first is, I'm sure you're aware that there's a population, a small one granted, but a certain number of bronies within the community who are psychologists or therapists, whether they're studying or not, that are actively putting themselves out there to help others. They'll put videos up on their channels of them interviewing other people or giving them sessions And I've found more often than not, there's a lot of people that are saying either this is really good because these are problems that can be generalized to a wider audience, which is why they share this individual's problems. But there's another population that are saying this is this person's problems and they shouldn't be shared. What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's actually a question that comes up within the field of psychology and particularly therapy, because and you'll sometimes see on TV or radio, there will be therapists who will take calls and listen to people's problems and then give them advice. And there's usually two camps about that. One camp says that's great because it's kind of like a form of self-help. Other people listening will say, oh my gosh, that sounds like my problem. And then the advice is something they may use. But there's another group saying that therapy it needs to be almost treated, it's a very special relationship. And sometimes disclosing the information to large groups of people could in fact bring you in for even more. Suddenly people go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize they had that problem. And that. So some argue that it should be kept more private. I personally think it depends upon how the therapist handles it. And in fact, there are times I get people come up to me and or in my class, they'll raise their hand and say, Dr. Edwards, I have this problem, blah, blah. And sometimes I'll say, well, wait a minute, you need to talk with me after class. Because I don't want everybody to hear it. It needs to be much more one-on-one. Whereas other times I'll take the question because I think everybody can benefit from it and it's not that potentially problematic. So,
I practiced for over 30 years and retired from private practice. And I personally am very against this. You never know what the consequences are going to be about divulging this. You never know who on the internet is going to see this and begin to take advantage of that individual, and that does happen. And I think I need to tell you that the two people who are famous for getting on radio and television, Dr. Joyce Brothers and then Dr. Phil, are no longer have their licenses. They got them jerked for exactly what they're doing.
you also have to be careful because sometimes the people aren't who they think they are.
Yeah.
Back in South Dakota years ago, there was a guy going around doing hypnotherapy with people, and they ended up discovering he had a master's in music. He had no formal training in hypnosis. So you also have to be careful that people are. I don't feel quite as strongly as Marcia does. I mean, I think it can be useful, but I think it has to be done sort of very, very carefully.
I'm unalterably opposed to it.
Yeah.
At this
We
point.
don't agree on everything.
At this point.
Including
But
favorite ponies.
Let me tell you that if there were two people who were more opposite, it's us.
Oh, and by the way, I keep hearing this, we are not married.
No, we are not married.
Her husband is sitting back there.
He's waving his hand. Yeah, that's
We are
my
colleagues.
husband.
I get people who'll say, well, yeah, I talked to your wife. And I went, you did? She's back in South Carolina. But we work well together and we're a good team because we are very
opposite.
different in personality and
An
interests.
approach.
But it means we bring a lot of different directions to the task.
Yeah.
Okay, the second part of my question was, you had mentioned earlier that this is a fandom where you generally see people smiling and My Little Pony's helping them. I'm a fan of My Little Pony personally, so that there's nothing personal to this, but in my own studies, I've found, unfortunately, the majority of the Brony population are made up of individuals that have home problems or depression or illnesses or generally things that they're using My Little Pony to escape from. It's an escape, somewhere they can go to stop thinking about it for a while.
That's not always a bad thing, though.
No, but how is it going to solve the problem permanently? Because these people are only escaping to the fandom for a certain time. It's not solving their home problems.
No, it's not solving the problem. they may get something out of it that does help them solve the problem, but it's not solving the problem, but that's where your family and your friends and your therapist comes in. And, but for some people who are absolutely having an anxiety attack, or the cutters, or the anorexics, the bulimics, this could be a safe place for them to go where they can get out of this for a little while and get some relief, because very often when those problems such as bulimia, anorexia, the cutting are going to lead to suicide. And, we definitely want to keep it away from that mark. And if My Little Pony's going to do that for 20 minutes and put them into a different frame of mind, then I think that's positive. But this is not to say that they should not be working towards solutions to these problems with friends or family or their faith or spirituality or a therapist.
And it's not just My Little Pony. I mean, I know someone personally who quite often retreats for the weekend into their room and will watch, back to back to back episodes of some TV program or some cartoon show and accomplish nothing except that they took the weekend and off. So, I agree with Marcia. You want to see people, sometimes we need a break, we need a good laugh, but you also want to see them sort of working towards. Of course, also realize depression is the common cold of mental illness. 1 in 4 people, it's typically in some state of depression. So it's not uncommon in that.
Yeah.
I can understand that, but...
Okay, we've got 3 minutes, so could we move, we've got 3 more people, so could we move on down the line? Thank you,
Thank
though.
you.
I'm going to try to shorten this a little bit, but this goes back to the conversation about the secret bronies, or closet bronies, if you will. But I was on YouTube several months ago, and there was this guy he was just making comments, pretty much asking people, well, I'm going to tell my friends that I'm a brony, but he's not sure that he can, but he says he will, just in time, if anyone had advice. And my question is if my advice, do you think it was good? I told him that I think he should tell them that he is a brony, because if anything, and I've learned this from personal experience myself, is if you tell your non-brony friends, if you see how they react, if they completely cut you off or if they accept it, you really learn their true colors towards you. Do you think it's good advice? Or be honest now, because if it's bad advice, I want to know.
One of the things that I really recommend before you tell them that you're a brony is to get them to watch an episode with you and see what their reaction is. And, if their reaction's kind of favorable or lukewarm, then, I think it's, you could tell them. If they're, sitting up there, I can't understand why you're watching this. Man, this is a girly thing, really bad-mouthing the show, then, maybe that's something you really do need to keep to yourself. Because not everybody, even your friends, may not be open-minded.
Experience is a good teacher,
Yeah. Next.
Thank you.
1 minute, 17 seconds.
We're out of time.
We are all good. Oh, I'm sorry, everybody.
Look, we will be at the back. I will be. Dr. Edwards has to go to a meeting.
Yeah, any of the admins, the meetup admins, if you'll hold, and you can follow me down.
Yeah, maybe meet them right outside the left.
I will be at the back in the hall to answer any questions that you all have.
Thank you all.
Thank you.